The African National Congress has responded to Afriforum, the Patriotic Alliance, and the Democratic Alliance in respect to the march that they held yesterday. Yesterday was a very strange day in South Africa. Well, in America, they were voting for the next president, but something happened in South Africa that warrants comment and attention too. Yesterday, two government ministers marched against the law signed by their boss and principal and president, the BELA Act. Those ministers, specifically being John Steenhuisen, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, the second largest coalition partner in the Government of National Unity, and Gayton Mckenzie, the leader of the Patriotic Alliance, coalition partner as well in the Government of National Unity. They marched with Afriforum, they marched with Solidarity, and they marched with other members of the Afrikaner community who were opposed to this BELA Act. And the march that they had was the Stop BELA March. And Afriforum has recently shown and flexed their muscle because they recently held an event with the king of the Amazulu, Misizulu Gazwelithini. So they're not just some sideshow in the South African political spectrum. They hold a lot of influence, they have a lot of resources, and they're willing and able to utilize those resources to favor their interests and to lobby for their specific interests. So the BELA March, which was held yesterday, was held at the Voortrekker Monument. The Voortrekker Monument, which is located in Pretoria, is a significant cultural and historical landmark which is dedicated to the Voortrekkers, who are Afrikaner pioneers who migrated from the British Cape Colony into the interior of South Africa during the 1830s and 1840s in an event which is referred to as the Great Trek. It's something that is very historically significant within the Afrikaner community. The monument honors the approximately 20,000 Voortrekkers who participated in this migration, which was seen as a rebellion against British colonial rule. The Voortrekker Monument has played a crucial role in shaping and maintaining Afrikaner identity. It serves as a symbol of Afrikaner nationalism and pride, and particularly served as a symbol during the apartheid era, where it was used to promote the narrative of Afrikaner heritage, supremacy, as well as dominance. The monument during apartheid became a symbol for Afrikaner supremacist thinking and hegemony over South Africa. So the choice of having this particular event at the Voortrekker Monument, which was the site or the rallying position or place for the Nationalist Party, for apartheid ideology and thinking for a very long time, was one that was a provocative message to the President of South Africa. It was a declaration that Afriforum, the DA, and all of these other organizations are getting ready for a massive fight. The law was signed into law in September, on the 13th of September. The president then said he was going to suspend for 3 months the provisions which the DA was opposing, that Afriforum was opposing. That 3 months is ending in December. And now on the 5th of November, we saw a big march. So the DA and Afriforum are opposed to the provisions of the BELA Act that allow for the head of department of the Department of Basic Education to determine the school language policies and admission policies in public schools. Public schools in South Africa are funded by and owned by the government. Some of them are fee-paying, which allows those schools to supplement the staff at the school, the infrastructure, and to hire additional teachers. But they are still receiving public funds from the government, right? There have been some challenges in some of these schools around admissions and languages, some confrontations, right? These schools in particular, where these challenges have happened, the public schools, are known as HU schools, which are Afrikaans medium schools. It's very important to remember that during apartheid, two things happened which created different economic trajectories based on racial identity and where you were located in the country. The Group Areas Act was a key piece of legislation in South Africa which was enacted on the 7th of July in 1950 during the apartheid era. This act, the Group Areas Act, established a legal framework for racial segregation by designating specific geographic areas for exclusive use by particular racial groups, primarily affecting Black South Africans, Coloureds, and Indians. The act aimed to enforce and institutionalize the apartheid government's policies and philosophies of racial discrimination and segregation, which were already in practice. So the suburbs then became a no-go area for Black people in particular, right? Then this was followed by the Bantu Education Act of 1953. And this act made it law of the land to give Black South Africans an inferior education. The good schools were predominantly located in the suburbs. These schools were funded, the teachers were sent to different training colleges, these schools were given all of the resources, swimming pools, rugby fields, cricket stadiums, you name it, these schools had it, right? The National Party and the architects of apartheid had a clear set of attitudes and beliefs about the role of the African in society and the education of the African, right? Black people, they just called us the Africans. In 1949, just 1 year after taking power, the National Party government appointed Dr. Marx Esalen to set up a commission investigating the education of Africans. Esalen, who was an ally of Hendrik Verwoerd, compiled recommendations which had the objective of drastically limiting the scope of education for the Black child and removing the church from its role in African education. They were so angry that mission schools were providing quality education to Black people across the country. The Esalen Commission's report of 1951 gave birth to the infamous Bantu Education Act of 1953. When speaking about the education of Africans, Hendrik Verwoerd had the following to say. This is what he said, and this is what it was all about. There is no place for the Bantu in the European community above the level of certain forms of labor. It is of no avail for him to receive a training which has as its aim absorption in the European community, while he cannot and will not be absorbed there. Blacks should never be shown the greener pastures of education. They should know that their station in life is to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. This was the purpose of the Bantu Education Act, to keep Black people as cheap labor for the apartheid regime. That was the aim, and it was enforced and implemented through the Bantu Education Act. So the suburbs had luxurious schools, well-resourced. The townships and the rural areas had very poorly resourced schools. After 1994, when apartheid ended, Black people started moving into the suburbs of South Africa. Neighborhoods started changing in their demographic nature. Some areas that were predominantly Afrikaans areas shifted into being mixed language communities, meaning that they had rich people, poor people, white people, Afrikaans people, Black people, Zulu people, mixed in a variety of ways, right? And some of those people had children, and those children had to go to schools. And this is where the issues started. The schools in these areas, these suburbs, which were disproportionately funded during the apartheid regime, refused to change language policies and to be inclusive. These being government schools, public schools. One example is her school, Emelo, in Mpumalanga. The school refused to accommodate English-speaking students in 2006-2007. The school only had 537 students, while it had a capacity for 2,000 students, because most of the people living in the area were English-speaking. They didn't want to go to an Afrikaans medium school, and they didn't speak Afrikaans. So they were approached by the Department of Basic Education, which said, you guys have capacity. Why don't you become a dual medium school? They refused. They said, we're not going to register those students. Register them at another school. We will give you 2 disused buildings, one of them being the former laundry, to teach these students in English. The department said, that's not going to work for us. And what they then did is the department, HOD, changed the school admission policy, changed the language policy through the establishment of an interim committee. That then went to all of the courts. It went to the High Court, it went to the Supreme Court, and it went to the Constitutional Court. The Department of Basic Education lost parts of this case at the Constitutional Court because of the way in which the language policy was changed. But it did affirm that the HOD was entitled to change the language policy, but it did not look into how and what measures of rationality should be applied when that language policy is implemented. The judgment was also critical of the government's failure to improve education, to improve the number of schools available for people. But it's important to recognize that it would be very difficult for a government to build new schools in the suburbs, for instance, because the property values in the suburbs have gone up since the apartheid regime ended. And it would be difficult. For instance, there's a place called Rosebank in Johannesburg. It's very close to a school called Saint David's. This school was built during the apartheid era. To build a school close to Saint David's at the same quality as Saint David's would be near impossible to do right now, because the valuation of the property is just gone through the roof, just by way of example. So this thing went all the way to the Constitutional Court, and it created confusion about where do these powers lie? Who is in charge of the school admissions policy? And this is what precipitated the BELA process. Part of the law was specifically designed to clarify who has the final word on school language policy and school admissions policy. And the BELA Act says that that authority rests with the head of department. This is what has caused the fight with Afriforum, with the Democratic Alliance, with the Patriotic Alliance, because they don't want that. Because what it means effectively is that if a community has a lot of black kids and they want to learn in English, that whose school, which is historically an Afrikaans school, as a result of the Bantu Education Act and the Group Areas Act, that school now has to become a dual medium school. Not an English-only school, but a dual medium school. That's what the Act effectively means in that respect. I'm not a supporter of parts of the Act based on other provisions, but let's have a conversation about the ANC's response, now that I've given you the context that you need to be up to speed. This is what the ANC has said. The ANC Study Group on Basic Education urges the President to promulgate commencement of all sections of the BELA Act with immediate effect. The African National Congress Study Group on Basic Education in Parliament believes that the latest march by the Democratic Alliance, Afriforum, Freedom Front Plus, Patriotic Alliance, and Solidarity against the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act, arguing that the act will limit mother tongue education and take away decision-making from the school governing bodies, is clearly misguided. The notion that the act infringes on being taught in one's mother language is disinformation. The BELA Act instead encourages schools to accommodate more languages. We must be clear that when these ethno-nationalist parties speak of marching for the protection of indigenous languages, it very simply means that they are marching for the protection of the Afrikaans language only and white privilege. It is disingenuous to claim that the Afrikaans language, like all other languages, is under threat. Similarly, there is no centralization of powers, and the belief that the Act will remove all the school governing bodies' powers and place the powers to govern in the hands of the heads of department is inaccurate. Rather, school governing bodies will maintain authority over language and administrative policies subject to the head of department's approval aligned with the Constitution. A school is not and cannot be seen as static and insular. A school is not and cannot be seen as a static and insular entity. Institutions must adapt and develop. Their what is that word? What is it doing? Woo, woo, woo. Their fiduciary duty then is to the institution as a dynamic part of an evolving society. The governing body of a school must, in addition, recognize that it is entrusted with the public resource, which must be managed not only in the interest of those who happen to be the learners and parents at the time, but also in the interest of the broader community in which the school is located and in alignment with the values of our Constitution. Seeking to redress the imbalances that exist within our education system is what the Act is ultimately trying to do, and any opposition to this is opposition to achieving an inclusive and equitable education system. There are challenges in the basic education that impede our progress. We have seen the cases of learners being denied admission to schools because of their language policies. There have been great disparities in norms and standards, in governance, and in access to resources in schools. This act seeks to address these challenges and is part of the state's ongoing efforts to build an education system that is more effective and more equitable. Nation building and social cohesion are the cornerstones of our democracy, and the ANC believes that education is a crucial pillar in helping us build a united nation, whilst ethnic nationalism is one such threat to nation building. We will not let language, spatial planning, nor money be used as exclusionary tools, and we cannot and we will not betray the class of 1976. Section 79(1) of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa states that the President must either assent to and sign a bill passed in terms of this chapter, or if the President has reservations about the constitutionality of the bill, refer it back to the National Assembly for reconsideration. This section of our Constitution is instructive that once a bill is passed by Parliament, the President must either assent to it and sign it or return it to the National Assembly on the grounds of constitutionality. The study group is confident that the BELA Act passes constitutional muster and reaffirms its support for the Act. Further, no bill of parliament which has gone through a thorough and comprehensive public participation process can and should be amended through coercion, intimidation, and political posturing. The ANC Study Group on Basic Education urges the President to promulgate the commencement of all sections of the BELA Act with immediate effect. Issued by the African National Congress Study Group of Basic Education. This is where things are. This is where things are. The ANC is letting the President know that they are not going to budge on this. And he has budged, but he is not the only person in his own organization. So here are my comments and thoughts on this briefly. Number one, government schools should be inclusive. Government schools should be inclusive, and they should actually, as far as possible, teach as many languages as they can. So I think moving to a dual medium school as part of admissions policy is something that even historically Afrikaner schools should not be opposed to. A lot of Afrikaners speak great English. It's not a problem to have both languages being taught in the schools. That's my first thing. Number two, Afrikaans culture can be preserved through dual medium instruction. I think that it is a red herring and a dishonest argument for Afriforum and other organizations to claim that this somehow is going to lead to a deterioration in either mother tongue education or their own culture and history and their role in South African society. I don't think that's true, and I don't think that they should be making that argument. Number three, I also think that there should be a recognition by the Afrikaner community that the success of these Afrikaans medium schools is partly as a result of the Group Areas Act, because these schools are located in suburbs where other people were not allowed to come, people who look like me, Africans, and because they were funded 4 times more than public schools in townships and rural areas. And once you have that kind of a head start for 40-something years, you're going to maintain that head start in the new dispensation post-democracy. So there have been failures by the ANC to fix township schools, rural schools. There's been a lot of corruption, a lot of mismanagement. I am very critical of the ANC when it comes to education. But when it comes to these particular schools which currently exist, which other kids also want to go to, you can't say to other kids, no, you must learn in Afrikaans or else. Apartheid is over. It's been over. So these schools have to become part of an inclusive South Africa. That's my view. I think that the ANC is correct to say that the school admissions policy should be flexible. I think so. Make it dual medium. I don't think it's going to take away from your culture. Having said that, this GNU, that's my final comment, I don't think this GNU is going to make it. It's shaking too much, too early. We're still in November of 2024. It's already shaking like this. You're already seeing ministers, prominent ministers within the GNU, moving against their own GNU. These are major cracks to have, and to have two ministers openly defy their coalition partner in this manner, in addition to some of the other confrontations that have happened on international relations, on national health insurance. I don't think that this thing is going to hold much longer. I don't think that the internal systems, the clearinghouse for dispute resolution, is working. I don't think that the DA wants to negotiate with Paul Mashatile. I don't think that they recognize his authority because he's supposed to be chairperson of the clearinghouse. I also think that President Ramaphosa is on a vulnerable wicket going into the ANC conference, which is coming up in 2027. He has to move carefully. Local governments are elections are in 2026. This whole thing, because of the ideological differences from the jump, the markets insisted on this. Helen Zille was saying the markets told us to back the Ramaphosa administration a few days ago. She was saying that and admitting it. I don't know. The markets, can you see what's happening here? I don't know. Guys, what do you think? Let's have a conversation. Till the next one. Do you think the ANC's response was correct? Do you think that this thing is going to hold? Let's have a conversation.